It was a crisp October morning in Lexington, Kentucky. The golden leaves fluttered through the air as Tom Hensley, a 58-year-old hardware store owner, sipped his coffee on the back porch. His golden retriever, Scout, sat loyally at his feet, occasionally glancing up at his owner, sensing something was off. Tom had always been a sturdy man, broad-shouldered, former college football player, the kind of guy who fixed his own plumbing and never saw a doctor unless something was broken. His wife, Julia, used to nag him about his checkups before she passed away 3 years earlier. Since then, Tom had been on his own, burying himself in work and avoiding the quieter, lonelier parts of life. That morning, as Tom reached down to pet Scout, his right hand trembled slightly. He frowned, trying to brush it off as maybe too much caffeine. But when he stood to grab another cup, his right foot dragged oddly like it wasn't keeping up with the rest of his body. He stumbled slightly but caught himself. "Getting old," he muttered. He didn't think much of it. But Scout kept staring at him with a nervous intensity. By the time he made it back to the kitchen, Tom's arm felt heavy. His hand wasn't responding quite right, like someone had wrapped it in bubble wrap. He tried flexing his fingers, thinking maybe he had just slept on it wrong. That's when the first real sign appeared. He looked into the hallway mirror and saw that the right side of his face was drooping. "Huh," he said aloud, watching his mouth curve lopsided in the reflection. He laughed nervously, but his voice sounded slurred. "No way," he said. "I'm fine. Probably just pinched a nerve." Tom was a proud man. He didn't like hospitals. He didn't like fuss. So he did what so many Americans do in that moment. He ignored it. He drove himself to the store like it was any other day. The world spun a little at the edges, but he figured it was the lack of sleep or maybe the stress from tax season. He could feel his speech slurring slightly when customers came in, but he joked it off. "Don't mind me, been up since 4 a.m., he told one regular. By noon, things had only worsened. His right arm was practically useless. He had knocked over a shelf of screws trying to restock. His leg dragged behind him like it didn't belong. But the worst part was when he tried to write out a receipt and realized he couldn't make his hand obey. He looked at the paper. The handwriting was a shaky, almost illegible scrawl. He was scared now. But instead of calling 911, Tom did what he always did. He tried to muscle through it. He Googled numb arm and face droop and saw the word stroke. He scoffed. No. I'd know if it were that serious. But by 3 p.m. he collapsed behind the counter. It was the UPS driver, Maria, who found him. She screamed for someone to call 911, knelt beside him and saw the telltale signs: facial drooping, slurred speech, arm weakness. She knew her grandmother had suffered a stroke last year. The paramedics arrived 12 minutes later. Time was critical now. And Tom had already lost too much of it. The ambulance tore through Lexington's quiet streets, sirens wailing, as the paramedics worked feverishly to stabilize Tom. One of them, Jake, checked his watch repeatedly. "Last known normal?" he asked Maria, who had jumped into the back with them. She looked at her phone. "I saw him around 11:30 and he was slurring. I thought he was tired, but now maybe earlier." Jake's face tightened. "That puts us past the 3-hour window, maybe more." "Damn." Tom's eyes fluttered open briefly. His lips parted as if to speak, but only garbled sounds came out. His gaze darted around the ambulance, panicked. "Mr. Hensley, you're having a stroke," Jake said firmly, locking eyes with him. "You're gonna be okay. We're getting you help." Tom couldn't respond. His brain was sending signals, but his body wasn't listening. At St. Joseph's Medical Center, the ER team was already waiting. Tom was wheeled into the trauma bay as nurses shouted vital signs and times, machines beeped furiously, and a neurologist, Dr. Lila Ramirez, reviewed the CT scan coming through. "Confirmed ischemic stroke. Large vessel occlusion," she said grimly. "Can we give TPA?" a nurse asked. Dr. Ramirez shook her head. "Too late. He's well past the window. We'll need to move to thrombectomy immediately. Prep him." Meanwhile, Maria sat in the waiting room, shaken. She had no idea who to call. Tom didn't talk much about family. She had only ever seen a few pictures of a woman and a young man on the store's wall. A small dog lay beside her Scout. The EMTs had brought him along after he refused to leave Tom's side. "He's lucky you found him," said a nurse who had come out to check on her. "Strokes, they move fast. Every minute counts." "I should have said something," Maria whispered. "I thought he was just tired. I mean, he's always been like this, quiet, stubborn. Thought he could work through anything." The nurse sighed. "A lot of people think that. But ignoring the signs, it can cost everything." Inside the OR, Dr. Ramirez carefully guided a catheter up from Tom's groin through his arteries, heading for the clot that was cutting off blood flow to his brain. It was delicate work. One wrong move could mean massive brain damage or worse. Just a few more millimeters, she murmured, eyes locked on the screen. And then they reached it. With precision and calm under pressure, Dr. Ramirez deployed the stent retriever, trapped the clot, and slowly began pulling it out. After what felt like an eternity, she leaned back and nodded. Clot's out. Now we wait and monitor swelling. He's not out of the woods. 2 hours later, Tom lay in the ICU, a tangle of tubes and wires snaking from his body. The ventilator hissed beside him. Dr. Ramirez stepped out to brief Maria, who was still in the waiting room with Scout curled around her feet. He made it through surgery, but there's brain damage. Extent unknown until he wakes up. Is he going to walk again? Talk? It's hard to say. We'll need a neurologist and a rehab team. But I'll be honest. It would have been a very different story if he'd come in right when the symptoms started. Maria looked at the floor. He didn't want help. Said he was fine. That's the danger with strokes, Dr. Ramirez said. They don't always hurt. They sneak up on you. You think it's nothing, tiredness, stress, maybe a pinched nerve. But every minute the brain is starved of oxygen, millions of neurons die. She pointed to a poster on the wall behind her. It read, F.A.S.T. Face drooping, arm weakness, speech difficulty. Time to call 911. Maria nodded slowly. Think he'll make it? Dr. Ramirez didn't sugarcoat it. I think he'll survive. But whether he'll ever be the same, that's up to the rehab gods. Scout whined quietly, as if he understood. Tom woke up 3 days later. His first conscious moment was quiet and disoriented. The ICU room was dim, and the constant beeping of machines created a strange rhythm. He tried to speak, but his tongue felt like it had forgotten how to form words. His throat was dry, his body foreign. He turned his head slightly, a Herculean effort, and saw Scout curled up in a chair by the window. The sight made his eyes sting. Somehow, just knowing his dog was there made everything feel a little less terrifying. A nurse walked in. Mr. Hensley? You're awake. He blinked slowly in response. Don't try to talk yet. Okay? You've been through a lot. Let's get Dr. Ramirez. Minutes later, the neurologist stood at his bedside with a calm but serious expression. You had a stroke, Mr. Hensley. Pretty severe one. You're lucky to be alive. Tom tried to say something. Came out as a groan. Your speech was affected, as well as motor function on your right side, she explained gently. You've got weakness in your arm and leg, and some facial drooping. But we got to the clot. Now it's all about rehab. Tom closed his eyes. He had always been the guy people came to when they needed help. And now he couldn't even lift his arm. Rehab started a few days later at the inpatient neuro unit. His first session with the speech therapist, Ashley, was humbling. She held up flashcards with simple words and pictures. This is she prompted, pointing at a picture of a house. HH. Tom forced out, but it died on his tongue. He clenched his jaw, frustrated. It's okay, Ashley said kindly. We'll get there. Physical therapy was even harder. Let's try standing today, said Marcus, the PT assigned to him. We've got the harness, and I'll be right beside you. Tom barely got his right foot to slide forward. Every step felt like walking through molasses. His body was no longer under his full command, and the realization was almost unbearable. I used to carry a whole toolbox with this arm, Tom said through gritted teeth one day, his voice still slurred. And you will again, Marcus said. But it's going to take time. And patience. Tom wasn't sure he had either. But one thing he had? Grit. Back at the store, Maria kept things running with the help of Tom's part-time employee, Caleb. Word had spread in town about Tom's stroke. Regulars dropped by with casseroles and cards. A GoFundMe page Maria set up was gathering traction. One afternoon, Maria visited Tom and brought Scout along. Tom was sitting in a wheelchair by the window, working on speech exercises. He lit up when Scout trotted in, tail wagging, tongue out. Hey, buddy, Tom mumbled, barely forming the words. Maria blinked, surprised. That's the first time I've heard you say a full sentence. Tom nodded slowly. Good dog. They both laughed, a rough, imperfect sound, but real. She sat down next to him. You scare the hell out of us, Tom. I'm not gonna lie. He looked at her and tried to say something, then pointed to his head and mouthed, didn't know. Maria nodded. That's the thing. None of us do. Until it's too late. She reached into her bag and pulled out a flyer. It was from the hospital, an awareness pamphlet about stroke signs. I put this up in the store, she said. Big, right by the cash register. F.A.S.T. People need to know. Tom took it, looked at the bold letters, and nodded again, a tear escaping down his cheek. Each day after that, he got a little better. He still needed a walker. His speech was far from perfect. But he was improving slowly, stubbornly, steadily. One morning, he looked at Ashley and said clearly, I should have called. She smiled. You're saying it now. That counts. It was 6 weeks post-stroke when Tom returned home. The discharge was bittersweet. The hospital staff cheered for him as he was wheeled out, Scout proudly striding beside him like a service dog on duty. He still had a long road ahead, but getting out of the hospital felt like winning a small war. His home, once a place of quiet solitude, now looked different through his new lens. Every doorknob, every step, every cabinet handle was now a challenge. Maria had worked with a local contractor to install railings, ramps, and widen the bathroom door. She even set up a small bed downstairs so he wouldn't have to navigate the staircase just yet. Your kingdom, she said with a smile as she helped him inside. Tom looked around, a little dazed. Home, he murmured. The next few weeks were full of milestones and setbacks. He had a speech app on his tablet that he used daily. Scout sat patiently while Tom practiced basic sentences. Sometimes the words came. Other times he got stuck in his own head, trapped between thought and speech. But Tom was nothing if not stubborn. He built a makeshift therapy routine structured with military discipline. He was up at 6 a.m. every day doing finger taps, balance drills, facial exercises in front of the mirror. He logged every session in a spiral notebook with shaky handwriting. Maria came by every afternoon to check in and help with the store's bookkeeping. One day, she brought a small TV crew from the local station. They're doing a segment on stroke awareness, she told him. I thought maybe you could share your story? Tom hesitated. He didn't love the spotlight, especially now that he struggled to speak. But Maria looked him in the eye. You could save someone's life. That did it. The segment aired the following week on WKYT Lexington. The footage showed Tom in his home, using his walker, slowly forming words, his eyes earnest and determined. Tom Hensley didn't know the signs of stroke. By the time he got help, it was almost too late. But today he's learning to walk, speak, and live again. He's sharing his story to help others recognize the warning signs before it's too late. Remember F.A.S.T, face drooping, arm weakness, speech difficulty, time to call 911. The segment ended with Tom saying just one clear sentence, don't wait. It resonated. The hardware store saw a sudden uptick in customers who just wanted to shake his hand, or in Tom's case, his left one. You're a hero, Tom, one woman told him. My brother had the same thing. Your story made us take him seriously. Tom always gave the same reply, not hero. Just lucky. But he knew that wasn't quite true. He had almost ignored every warning sign. What had saved him, in the end, was a mix of chance and the compassion of someone who had paid attention. By Thanksgiving, Tom was walking short distances without the walker. His speech had improved enough to hold brief conversations, especially with Scout, who always seemed to understand more than any human. That evening, Maria, Caleb, and a few friends from town gathered at his house for a small dinner. Tom stood, wobbly but proud, and raised a glass of apple cider. I want to say thank you, he began slowly. For staying. For caring. For not giving up. The room fell quiet. You don't always get a second chance, he said. I almost didn't. There were a few tears, a few toasts. Even Scout barked in agreement. Maria leaned over and whispered, You're doing more than surviving, Tom. You're teaching people to live. Spring came early in Kentucky. The cherry blossoms outside Tom's store bloomed a soft pink, and the town was waking up from its winter hush. Inside Hensley Hardware, the shelves were freshly stocked, a new bell hung above the front door, and a small section near the register had been transformed into a health awareness corner, pamphlets, posters, and a bright yellow sign that read. Tom stood behind the counter, a little slower, a little more cautious, but he was there. He built a makeshift therapy routine structured with military discipline. He was up at 6 a.m. every day doing finger taps, balance drills, facial exercises in front of the mirror. He logged every session in a spiral notebook with shaky handwriting. Maria came by every afternoon to check in and help with the store's bookkeeping. One day, she brought a small TV crew from the local station. They're doing a segment on stroke awareness, she told him. I thought maybe you could share your story? Tom hesitated. He didn't love the spotlight, especially now that he struggled to speak. But Maria looked him in the eye. You could save someone's life. That did it. The segment aired the following week on WKYT Lexington. The footage showed Tom in his home using his walker, slowly forming words, his eyes earnest and determined. Tom Hensley didn't know the signs of stroke. By the time he got help, it was almost too late. But today he's learning to walk, speak, and live again. He's sharing his story to help others recognize the warning signs before it's too late. Remember F.A.S.T, face drooping, arm weakness, speech difficulty, time to call 911. The segment ended with Tom saying just one clear sentence, "Don't wait." It resonated. The hardware store saw a sudden uptick in customers who just wanted to shake his hand, or in Tom's case, his left one. "You're a hero, Tom," one woman told him. "My brother had the same thing. Your story made us take him seriously." Tom always gave the same reply, "Not hero. Just lucky." But he knew that wasn't quite true. He had almost ignored every warning sign. What had saved him, in the end, was a mix of chance and the compassion of someone who had paid attention. By Thanksgiving, Tom was walking short distances without the walker. His speech had improved enough to hold brief conversations, especially with Scout, who always seemed to understand more than any human. That evening, Maria, Caleb, and a few friends from town gathered at his house for a small dinner. Tom stood, wobbly but proud, and raised a glass of apple cider. "I want to say thank you," he began slowly. "For staying. For caring. For not giving up." The room fell quiet. "You don't always get a second chance," he said. "I almost didn't." There were a few tears, a few toasts. Even Scout barked in agreement. Maria leaned over and whispered, "You're doing more than surviving, Tom. You're teaching people to live." Spring came early in Kentucky. The cherry blossoms outside Tom's store bloomed a soft pink, and the town was waking up from its winter hush. Inside Hensley Hardware, the shelves were freshly stocked, a new bell hung above the front door, and a small section near the register had been transformed into a health awareness corner, pamphlets, posters, and a bright yellow sign that read. Tom stood behind the counter, a little slower, a little more cautious, but he was there. He greeted customers with a modest smile, his voice still carrying a slight slur but much improved. He'd worked tirelessly in therapy, even joining a local support group called Stroke Warriors, where survivors encouraged one another through setbacks and celebrated every small victory. That morning, a man in his early 60s came in with his teenage grandson. He looked at the stroke awareness display and turned to Tom. "You're the guy from the news," he said. "The stroke survivor, right?" Tom nodded. "That's me." The man looked down, then back up with glassy eyes. "Saw that segment. Made me go to the hospital when my arm went numb last week. They caught it early, mini-stroke, they said. Could have been worse." Tom's heart clenched. "You got help?" "Yeah. Because of you." Tom reached over the counter with his left hand and gripped the man's tightly. He didn't need to say anything else. They both understood. Later that afternoon, Tom sat on the porch behind the shop, Scout lying beside him as usual. Maria joined him with 2 coffees black, just the way he liked it. "You're making a real difference, you know," she said, handing him a mug. "People are paying attention." He smiled. "Better late than never." She tilted her head, studying him. "You ever think back to that day?" He nodded slowly. "Every morning. Every time I lift this cup. I remember not being able to." They sat in silence for a moment, the sounds of small-town life humming around them, distant traffic, birdsong, the occasional bark from Scout when a squirrel dared enter the yard. "I was so sure it was nothing," Tom said finally. "A little numbness, a little slurred speech. I told myself I was fine. That it'd pass." "That's what most people do," Maria said softly. "That's why these stories matter." He nodded, looking down at his hands, one steady, the other still a little shaky. "I learned something in rehab," he said. "The brain's got this thing called neuroplasticity. It can rebuild, reroute, like wiring a house all over again." Maria grinned. "That sounds like something a hardware guy would say." They laughed. That weekend, Tom gave a talk at the local high school for Stroke Awareness Month. He stood in front of a room full of teenagers, parents, and teachers. The words didn't come easily, but they came honestly. "You think stroke is something that happens to old people," he began. "Or to someone else. Not you. Not now. But stroke doesn't care how tough you are, how busy you are, how many bills you've got to pay." He paused, making eye contact with the kids. "It starts small. A numb arm. A weird smile. Your words don't come out right. And you think, I'll shake it off." Another pause. "But every minute your brain is starving. Neurons are dying. And the difference between walking out of a hospital or never walking again is how fast you act." He pointed to the projector screen behind him where the F.A.S.T acronym was displayed in bold red letters.